Sin is not your problem. And we'll even go part 1. How's that? Because I'll probably teach a few weeks. But we're going to get the ball rolling today on how sin is not your problem. Why is sin not your problem? Romans 6:10 says that Jesus died for sin once for all. He paid for sin once for all. He paid for sin once for all, therefore, sin is not your problem. If something's been paid for, it's not your problem, right? If you went to the bank one day to make your regular payment on your vehicle, and they said to you, oh, that's been taken care of. Somebody took care of that for you. Would you still want to give them your money? Nope. You would say, that's been taken care of. I don't have to pay for it anymore. You would just say, thank you for my vehicle's been paid off. Thank you, whoever did that. Shh. Same with sin. It's been paid for. It's been taken care of. So what do we struggle with sin so much? Why is the church so sin-focused? We'll get into this. Romans, let's see, I want to start at Romans, let's go to Galatians. Galatians chapter 5. I'm going to read a few things here out of Galatians 5. And we're going to bounce around, look at some other passages. I want you to understand what sin is and why it's not your problem and what the real problem is. Galatians chapter 5, verse 16, it says, so I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. If you want to, you can write down a key word there. It's desires. You will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sin nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. You could insert the word lust there. In some of the translations, it uses the words lust. Other translations use the words desire. They are in conflict with each other. The sin nature and the Spirit are in conflict with each other, so that you do not do what you want. But if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under law. Now, here's the interesting thing, and I'll read through this real quick. Verse 19, it says, the acts of the sinful nature are obvious. So everything I read through here is an obvious thing. It's not something that's a mystery. It's obvious. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissension, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. So, it says at the end of that, those who live like this. So that means every one of us could envy at one point or another. We could have some selfish ambition, maybe a fit of rage now and then, but we're not living like that. We're not living in that place, right? The acts of the sinful nature are obvious. Part of the reason that he says that it's obvious is because in the previous verse he says, if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. So obviously, conversely, if you're not led by the Spirit, then you are under the law, and the acts in operation under the law, you don't need somebody to tell you, hey, that's not the right thing to do. Case in point, Genesis chapter 4, this is before the law was ever written, before the Mosaic law. It says in verse 7, actually this is the whole story about Cain and Abel. Abel kept flocks, Cain worked the soil. Cain brought the fruits of the soil as an offering, but Abel brought the fat portions and the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked at with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. This is before the law. This is before anything else. Sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you. This is before he killed his brother. And the Lord came and warned him. He said, hey man, error is right there. Now, if you look up both words, translated sin in the Hebrew and the Greek, you will come up with the same general definition. Sin means to miss the mark. Means to err. To not have a share in. Miss the mark. And it happened all the way back here before there was a law. And God came to Cain and he said, listen, man, this error desires to have you. And what did he say about the solution? But you must master it. So if sin has been paid for, and I said the statement, sin is not your problem, then what is the problem? The problem is a lack of self-control by the Spirit of God. Shh. Hey, Sammy. Shh. You guys got to be quiet. You'll have to do the transition thing. Do you get to do that often now? Every now and then. If sin is not your problem, it's been paid for. Your problem is a lack of self-control by the Spirit. True self-control, I'll make this statement right now, true self-control comes only by the Spirit of God. So you're filled with the Spirit, you're empowered by God, and that's in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. Paul says to Timothy, he says, stir up the gift of God, or fan into flames the gift of God which is in you through the laying out of my hands. For you did not receive a spirit of fear to make you a slave again, but a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. Or a sound mind, depending on the translation, but it's the same overall word. Self-discipline and a sound mind are the same thing. That leads to James chapter 1, where it says, the double-minded man is unstable in all his ways and can't receive anything from God. If you're double-minded, you're bouncing back and forth. You're unstable. One minute you want this, the next minute you want that. Also in James chapter 1, it says that this is how the process works. Desire after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. Sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. Now, most people in the church want to say, don't sin. Don't sin. I want to say, don't die. Because the final result of sin is death. And they think, well, the final result is death. Well, that's at the end of your life. No, you could die every day to life. You could be dying to what the Lord wants to pour into you. Just like I just said in Galatians chapter 5. So I say to you, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. Over in 1 John, it talks about this sin, and it says in chapter 5, verse 16, if anyone sees his brother commit a sin that does not lead to death. And most people would say, well, does that mean he's dying right then at that spot? Could be, but more often than not, just sees the death of purpose, the death of life, the death of relationship within him. If they see somebody err and it doesn't lead to death, then he should pray and God will give him life. I refer to those whose sin does not lead to death. There is a sin that does not lead to death, and I'm not saying that he should pray about that. All wrongdoing is sin, and there is a sin that does not lead to death. Now here's the interesting statement that I want to get to, because this I had to meditate on this. For we know that anyone born of God does not continue to sin. The one who was born of God keeps him safe, and the evil one cannot harm him. So the one born of God doesn't keep sinning. I said, Lord, I keep sinning. He said, you don't understand what that says. The one who is born of God does not continue to sin, does not continue to live in error. That's what it means. It's not a lifestyle of living in error. And then the interesting thing that I read here, it says, the one who was born of God keeps him safe. And I looked this up, and it says the one being generated out of the God, or that's the way the Greek says it, out of the God is keeping self. So I asked the Lord, I said, so then the actual responsibility to keep myself out of sin is mine. He said, yeah. But if sin's been paid for and it's not my problem, then how does that all work? It works like this. If sin is not your problem, then your problem is staying away from sin. Sin's still involved. Here's the thing. I gave you the example of the car. You have a car. Somebody came to the bank, they paid it off, you went to pay it off, and it was paid off, and you said, no, I want that burden again. Put another loan on it. Take out the second mortgage. I want that burden on there. Why? It's already paid off of. Well, maybe I got some other things I want to spend that money on. And I'd rather make payments and pay a bunch more interest. Well, why don't you just save the money that you have now instead? You don't have to make those payments. Just take those payments and put them aside and just wait a little while and then do what you want to do with that money. No, I want it now. I've seen people do that. It comes back to desire. Desire is conceived, gives birth to error. Error, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. When we're looking at this idea of sin, realize that it's when God says, okay, I've taken care of sin, I've given you access to my spirit so you can be disciplined not to go back into it. Now the responsibility is yours. It's amazing to me when I talk with people and look at different teachings in the church, how much we focus on the wrong things. I read to you in Galatians, and it said, I say to you, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. The acts of the sinful nature are obvious. They're right out there. Meaning the things produced from the sinful nature, from living in it. Envy, strife, fits of rage, anger, sexual immorality. Just go through the list. Say, well, if something that's coming out of my life, then I got to step back and go, wait a minute, what am I living at? Where am I living? What's going on? The point is, sin's been paid for. The things that come out of the sinful nature are obvious. So what's my problem? My problem is I'm not focused on the right thing. Paul wrote it in Romans. He said, I would not have known what coveting was except the law said, do not covet. And as soon as I heard, do not covet, the sin seizing the opportunity afforded by the command, meaning sin saw, hey, he was just told not to do something, so I'm going to jump in there and say, do that. Do it. Do it. And he says, Paul writes, so sin sprang to life and I died. Now, did Paul physically die? No. But the minute he did something that was against his own nature, death was produced in him. You ever done something you shouldn't have done? And you make a mistake and you feel bad about it? That's an example of death being produced in you. You ever hurt, let me put it this way, you ever hurt somebody's feelings and afterwards you go, man, I shouldn't have done that. That was a taste of death. Because you can actually go through the same process of remorse, of a loss, all those things. Our problem is not sin. Our problem is living by the Spirit. And it takes being self-disciplined by that Spirit to live by the Spirit. We're trying so hard not to do things that we don't want to do instead of just doing what we should do. The Lord said it to Cain. He said, if you do what's right, you'll be accepted. If you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. He didn't say, I got to master it. The reality is he did. He paid for it all. So he's like looking at it going, wait a minute. If I paid for this, then why would you go back into it? Why would you go get another car loan on a car that's paid off? Unless you had something else that you felt was important. that you had to take care of. But I submit to you that if somebody comes along and takes care of that note for you, then however that came about, there's other provision for you not to have to go back into that debt again. And this all ties in. I'd love to give you just all this information and just download it in a nutshell. Go through Galatians, go through Romans, go through all these places where Paul talked about sin and the ramifications. And he says, I read to you about, he says, so you are not under law. If you live by the Spirit, you're not under law. Well, is that literal? I say to you, if you're led by the Spirit, you're not under law. That's chapter 5, verse 18. He talks about there, he says, so since you're living like this, don't submit yourself back underneath it. Don't get back underneath that law. This is what we all do. The sin comes, we see the error, we try to say to ourselves, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that thing over there because that's missing the mark. What we've just done is we've created a bunch of rules for ourselves. When we create a bunch of rules for ourselves or have somebody else create it for us, because we do have friends that come around and want us to try to obey this and obey that and because it makes them feel better about themselves. That's another topic. Point is, we want to put these rules on ourselves. Then what happens? Guaranteed, you can't live up to those rules that you put on yourself. And then you feel bad about it. When you can't live up to the rules you've made for yourself. You fail at those things. You struggle. You fight. Talks about it in Romans chapter 7, how it's a battle within you. Waging war against the law of my mind. Making me a prisoner of sin. I could read you the whole, it's almost like if I didn't want to teach it, if I wanted to teach it one way, I could just read to you what Paul wrote down. And go, there you go. Just read that. But I know it takes the anointing to open things up. But Paul talking about here, and I already read to you this, part of this. But in chapter 7, verse 8, it says, but sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the command, I said that, produced in me every kind of covetous desire. The law said, don't covet. Error came in and said, I desire to have you. Just like with Cain. I desire to have you. It's crouching at the door. I desire to have you. And Cain felt like, you know what? God just dissed me for my offering. I brought an offering. What's his problem, man? So it wasn't the best. Whatever. I'm the one who worked for it. Why is he going to have this attitude with me? Whatever. You know what? My offering will look real good if I get rid of the other guy. He thinks his offering's that good, I'll just knock him down. And then guess what? There'll only be one offering, and mine will be the best. However he wants to reason it, and we go, that's messed up. Yeah, it's messed up. But he already had stuff churning inside of him that was messed up. He said, you got to master it. That desire in you, you got to master it. Hey, Sug. Make sure those are on quiet. You got to master it. It's your responsibility. Whose responsibility is it? It's mine. To master what? To master sin. How easy is it to master sin? Look at this. I'll go back to the example. How easy is it to master sin? The car payment's been paid off. You don't have to make that payment anymore. It's already been paid off. You remember when you were making the car payment, you also had to keep up on the maintenance, change the oil, check the tires, put gas in it, do all these other things, right? Now the car payment's been paid. All you have to do is focus on the maintenance, keeping it going, taking care of it. You don't have the burden of the car payment anymore. You just got to maintain it. We'd like to throw up our hands and go, Lord, you just do it for me. He goes, I did. I provided payment for the sin. It's no longer in your, you don't have to make that payment anymore. And I gave you my spirit so you could be disciplined to do what you're supposed to do. To do what will benefit you. Desire. We talked a little bit about it Thursday. how emotions get in the way. We go, oh, I really want that. That's why I played that song by Rich Mullins. I'd rather fight you for what I don't really need or what I don't really want than take what you give that I need. It's desire. After desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. So we get these desires within us. Paul talked about it here. I want you to see this. He said, sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the command, produced every kind of covetous desire. Sin desires to have you. Error desires. Do you know what sin exists for? The nature of a thing is why it exists. Sin means error, to miss the mark. So the only way that it operates is by doing what it does. It's like amazing. You ever heard the story? Sometimes they put it in a joke. The lady she finds a rattlesnake in her backyard that got hurt, got run over or something like that. She brings it in the house. She nurses it back to health, feeds it, takes care of it, gets it back to where it's healthy and everything like that. And one day she reaches in the cage to give it some more food and the rattlesnake bites her. And as she's laying there on the ground dying, she looks at the rattlesnake and says, "Why did you do that?" And he says, "I'm a rattlesnake, lady. That's what I do." We keep thinking that we can just reach back in the cage because we did this good thing over here. It's not going to be bad for us. The nature of a thing is what it is.
Right.
The nature of sin is to miss the mark. The only way you're going to combat and defeat it is by living by the Spirit. You change the desire within you. I can't stop doing sinful things. I can start doing spiritual things. You ever try not to get into an accident? No, you just drive. Paying attention to what you're doing. Paying attention to other drivers. But you can't try not to get into an accident. You just need to drive safely yourself. You understand the concept? You can't try not to fall down a hill. There's all these other things, we look at them we look at all these other things correctly, and then we look back at the things that matter the most, and we see them wrong. You don't try not to starve to death. You just eat every day. You don't try not to be parched and thirsty. You just drink when you feel the drink. So why do we do it on sin? Because the church likes to be sin-focused instead of spirit-focused. The church tends to be, you know what, I'll just not do this and not do that. It goes back to the children of Israel. What did the children of Israel say? They said to Moses, "Listen, we don't want to hear the voice of God. We want to just have some rules and we'll follow the rules." And then throughout the entire Old Testament from that point on, it's just one incident after another of how they couldn't follow the rules. And then it talks about it in Galatians. Talks about it in Romans. Paul writing about it, and he says, listen, there's a faith apart from law. There's a faith that comes apart from the law. So that you're not under that law. See, here's the thing that people don't understand. If I'm living by the Spirit, then the Spirit of God will tell me and give me the strength and empowerment at any given moment to do what's in my benefit and not do what's not in my benefit. You understand that? If I'm living by the Spirit, it says, live by the Spirit and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. If you live by the Spirit, you won't do these things over here. You won't get in those things. So if you are doing those things, step back and go, wait a minute, I stopped living by the Spirit. How do you live by the Spirit? You just surrender to the Spirit of God. You say, you know what? I choose to. How do you do things? It's a focus. It's a purpose. How do you get on a bike and ride it? You push the pedals. How do you walk? You just do it. How do you live by the Spirit? You have to surround yourself with things. You have to give focus. People say, oh, I'm going to live by the Spirit, and then do everything contrary to what it means to live by the Spirit. I want to walk in peace, but I'm going to fight with everybody around me. I want to be secure, but I'm going to be fearful of my stuff will be stolen. Does that make any sense? I mean, if you can see it in the natural things, if you don't want to be in fear, then why would you do things that cause you to be in fear? If you want to have peace within you, why would you do things or allow things around you that interrupt that peace? And it comes back to a mindset. I have to read this to you. You read, like I said, I could read through chapter 8. There is therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. I'm not condemned. Because the reason there's no condemnation, because through Christ Jesus, the law of the Spirit of life set me free from the law of sin and death. For what the law was powerless to do, in that it was weakened by the sinful nature, God did by sending his Son in the likeness of sinful man to be a sin offering. So he condemned sin in sinful man, in order that the righteous requirements of the law might be fully met in us who do not live according to the sinful nature, but according to the Spirit. If you find yourself doing things you don't want to do, you're living according to the sinful nature. You say, but I don't want to live like that. Okay, but I'm getting to this point. And I'll jump back and forth and show you this. Verse 5. Those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what that nature desires. Those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what that nature desires. So you find yourself doing things you don't want to do. You find yourself sinning. Sin's not the problem. The outward acts are obvious, but that's not the problem. The problem is where your mind's at. What are you thinking about? It's what's going on up here. You have your mind set on what that nature desires. So you're being run by your emotions, being pushed by your emotions, because your mind's thinking about this stuff. Where was Cain? Cain's mind was set on error. It wasn't looking at himself saying, I could have, and you know what? There's no recording in that text in Genesis. We don't know how it came about. What was the point of them bringing an offering in the first place? I never read something leading up to it said you're supposed to bring something. And I said, okay, so were they supposed to bring an offering? Or did they just do it and say, you know what, I'm going to bring an offering? They obviously had a relationship with God. They say, I'm going to bring an offering before God. Hey, Sug. Shh. Gotta be quiet, okay? He said, I want to bring an offering before God. I don't know how it actually happened. I haven't asked the Lord in depth, but look at it this way. You don't read a commandment in there saying you got to bring an offering. So what if it was just Cain and Abel were familiar enough with God where they said, you know what? God gave us everything. They recognize that. I'm just going to bring an offering. So Cain steps up first and he says, you know what? I'm going to bring some of the grain that I produced. And then Abel, in his own heart, he says, you know what? I'm going to bring the best that I have. And Cain looks at it and goes, were you trying to outdo me? Do you get this? God looked at his offering disfavorably because of the heart motive, not because they're in competition. It'd be like this. I bring an offering and you bring the same exact offering. But yours is a little better, but it's the same exact thing. I bring a goat, you bring a goat, but your goat looks cooler. Should I be mad at you because you brought a cooler goat, or should I look at myself and go, you know what, I should have brought the best one I had? You know, they don't show up at these clubs, these kennel things, and bring the worst dog. They have to come up with different categories because this dog is a dog, but it's not the same as that dog. So they got to come up with different categories because different dog. But no matter what, they're all bringing the best. Whether it's the best poodle or chihuahua or Great Dane, whatever it is, they're all bringing the best in that category. Cain didn't bring the best. He just brought some. And I don't see a place in there that there's a command that he said he had to. Maybe there was. Point is, he didn't bring his best. Do you know what that says about him? He was selfish. He was keeping the best for himself. So why did God look disfavorably on his offering? Because he recognized his heart motive. You're not willing to give up your best so I can give you more. You want to keep your best for yourself. And when you operate out of a heart like that, you end up losing more than you ever could have given up. If you'd have given up this little portion, you'd have received so much more. But instead, in fact, it talks about that. Some of Cain's punishment, he was called to be a wanderer after that. So, back to this. Those who live according to the sinful nature have their mind set on what that nature desires. But those who live live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. The mind of sinful man is death. Read that? Not just death at the end like they say. Desire conceived gives birth to sin. Sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. We go, well, that's death at the end of your life after you've done a bunch of horrible things. No, it means your mind is focused on death at that moment. There's no life within it. There's no true creativity coming out of that. The mind controlled by the Spirit's life and peace. You ever find yourself where you just feel dead inside? It's where your mind is. And it goes back to where your desire is. And if your desire is, I want to do right over here, but I don't want to do right, and you're bouncing back and forth, you're double-minded. You're unstable in all your ways. Now, does that mean you're going to be perfect in this? No. I was having a conversation the other day, and I said, you know what? It's not a matter of being consistent every day as much as it's a matter of being, let me say it this way, it's a matter of being continuous. Was that what the word was it? Consistency over continuous, that's right. Consistency over continuous. Easy example. Just got to wait for the song to end. Okay, don't push any more buttons, all right? Consistency over continuity. What do I mean by that? Do you go to work every day? No, but you go to work the days you need to go to work. So you're actually consistent, but not continuous. Well, there's a consistency that God desires you to get into in your life. It may not be continuous. Sundays are a day that I get up early and come over here, so I don't get up and do normal prayer on Sundays. Because I usually don't get up as early as I do on Sundays through the rest of the week. Because that's my lifestyle. I have a different lifestyle. More of a second shift. Does that mean God displeased with me today because I don't do what I normally do the other 6 days? No, in fact, I'm doing something else that's for many people is more important than what I do for myself privately. We put rules on ourselves. I'm going to get up and I'm going to pray and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this, and that'll keep sin from me. Instead of just getting in the presence of God and saying, Lord, what should I be desiring? What should I be desiring? And the reason we don't get that concept is because we have our mind focused over here. Focused on that problem, focused on this problem, focused on this thing over here and that thing over here. And we don't have our mind set on what the Spirit desires. How do I get my mind set on what the Spirit desires? I got to at least, like I've taught before out of Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart by not leaning on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him and He'll make your path straight. So I can't lean on my own understanding, and I got to acknowledge Him. You don't have to get into intense prayer and do 8 hours of soaking every day. But you can get up in the morning and say, I recognize you're here with me. Help me to see what you desire for my life today. Sin is not the problem. It's the mind focus. It's where we're at. And that leads us into self-control. What is self-control or self-discipline? Sound mind. It means just what I'm reading right here. If your mind is over here on sin at one moment, and then flips over here to the Spirit at the other moment, and then flips back over here, you're going to be double-minded, unstable in all you do. So let's read this right here. Go back into chapter 7, because this leads up to it. So Paul's talking about this. Verse 14, he said, we know the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. And what I hate, I do. Anybody ever feel like that? What I want to do, I don't do. What I hate, I keep doing. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree the law is good. If I say, you know what, I recognize that I'm not doing what I want to do, then I'm recognizing that the rule that I just said has some validity. Because I shouldn't be doing that, and I recognize, hey, I shouldn't be doing that. And this law said, you shouldn't be doing that. So I'm looking at the law going, the law's right, I shouldn't be doing that. But does that get you out of it? No. Verse 17, as it is, and here's the key, as it is, it's no longer I myself who do it, but it's sin living in me. For I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what's good, but I cannot carry it out. I read that for years and I didn't fully get it. I was like, what? Paul just basically said, hey, it's sin doing it. Not my problem. And one day the Lord said, no. He said, it's sin living in me that does it. So if the Lord took care of sin, then it's actually, you got to make an effort to let sin live in you. What's the effort? I got to let my mind keep focused on it. Mm-hmm. And here's the key to it, verse 19. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it's no longer I who do it, but sin living in me that does it. It's sin living in me that does it. Now, verse 21 says, so I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil's right there with me. And I can take you back to where we read in Genesis chapter 4, where Cain says, sin desires to have you. Evil's crouching at your door. It desires to have you. I can take you to James chapter 1. Let me read that to you real quick so you got it. James chapter 1. It says, when I read to you, desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, right? Sin when it's full grown gives birth to death. That's James 1. Verse 15, let me read to you verse 13. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. So every time what Paul's saying here is, I see this law at work. When I want to do good, evil's right there with me. What is it? It's desiring to have me. Because that's its nature. That's what it does. It's the rattlesnake waiting to bite. It's not coming over to be your friend. It is what it is. Eventually it's going to bite. So Paul says this, for in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law at sin with work in my members. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body of death? Thanks be to God, through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin. So, sin's not your problem. But if you find yourself a slave to sin, it's what your mind's thinking about. Think about it in your mind right now. What are some things that you don't want to do that you know cause you problems in your life? The reason you keep doing those things is because of your focus. You're thinking about them. You're putting your mindset on them instead of putting your mind on what the Spirit desires. What does the Spirit desire? Life, peace. So it says, the mind of sinful man is death. The mind set on the Spirit, life and peace. Well, where do you want to live? You want to live in death? You want to live in life and peace? Sin's not the problem. It's been paid for. It's your mind. It's where your focus is. And then it's saying, you know what? I've been given a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. A soundness of mind, a singularity of mind. So all I need to do is operate in it. So I say to you, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. It all comes back to desire. It's living in that emotional state. But there's also a place of living in an emotional state and doing the right thing. I can cause my emotions to appreciate what the Spirit desires. I can get into that place and say, you know what? Spirit, I want to smack them in the face and say, knock that off. But the Spirit desires for me to wrap my arms around them and love on them. There's always an alternative. There's always a different solution. And it comes down to, all right, what's my focus? Where am I looking? What's going on? What is my focus? Is my focus on what my sinful nature desires? Because that's never really done any of us any good, has it? It led us into a lot of places, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of outward things that we go, yeah, that wasn't a good thing to do. The acts of the sinful nature are obvious. Paul gives a list there in Galatians, but you ever go, wait, you know what? See how that worked out? The key to this whole thing is right back there, what I read to you in verse 20. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it's no longer I do it, but sin living in me that does it. What's sin's fault? No, it's not what he was saying. He was saying, I've allowed it to live. I've allowed error to exist. Romans chapter 12, Paul writes in there and says, we are transformed by the renewing of our mind. Do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The moment that you see something, that you recognize something by the Spirit, and you go, that's error. The minute you recognize error, the minute you recognize you missed the mark, there's your opportunity to stop and say, you know what? I recognize error. Now I'm going to change my mind. Most people think that when they fail, that it's a bad thing. I'm going to tell you it's not. You're looking at it incorrectly. Proverbs, though the righteous man falls 7 times, he rises again. You ever heard that one? I think I've said it enough around here. Though a righteous man falls 7 times, he will rise again. Do you know why he rises again? Not just because he's righteous, meaning he's in the condition that he's supposed to be, but he fell, recognized why he fell, and then got back up and corrected the reason he fell. The wicked, they don't want to see why they fall. So they're brought down by everything. That's the continuation of that verse. The wicked are brought down by anything. Because they don't want to see why they've fallen and learn from it. Take your mistakes. Pastor Ken's had this phrase for a while. He's like, you know, one day everybody will learn from my successes versus learning from my mistake. I'm the object lesson is what he keeps saying. But you know how beautiful it is? I've watched this man grow in the 6-7 years that I've known him. Just grow and grow and grow. It's been steady. It's been consistent. Just grow and grow and grow. And once in a while we had get together and do some pruning, but he's just growing and growing and growing. So you know what I've said to him? Don't worry about being the object lesson. Look at the fact that you saw error, recognized it, and said, you know what? I have to change my mind about that. Even to the point now when he shares certain stories, he goes, hey, you know what? It may be my filter. Maybe my perception is off on this, but I got to ask this question. He even comes at it and says, I'm having a difficulty understanding this. What I do not understand what I do. So I'm going to ask, and it could be that there's some kind of error living in here, but I haven't been able to see it up to this point. So I'm asking this question so I can see it. Stop looking at your failures as a bad thing. I said the quote before. I like it. I don't care which variation you use, but Edison was asked, you know, you failed all this time about making the light bulb. He said, no, we found 99. They're talking about it took us 100 tries to get the light bulb right. And they said, so you failed 99 times. He said, no, we successfully discovered 99 times in which it would not work. He looked at his failure as a triumph because the minute he discovered, oh, it will not work that way. That was successfully keeping them from going in that direction any further. They didn't waste any more time. Nope, it will not work that way. Nope, it will not work that way. Nope, it will not work that way. He didn't look at it as a negative. He looked at it as a positive. Your failures expose error so that you can then operate in truth. It's not the man who makes mistakes that's the worst off. It's the man who makes mistakes and refuses to see the mistakes and learn from them. It's not the man who fails that's the most miserable. It's the man who continues to fail and refuses to see the source of his failure. I've learned so much from my failures, from my mistakes, from my missteps. That's one side of what gives me focus. I go, Lord, I don't really want to do that anymore. He goes, then don't try not to do that. Just focus on me. Because guess what? There's 1,500 things you're not going to see properly in a given day. But you know what? I'm supposed to fix my eyes on what is unseen, not on what is seen, what's eternal. So how do I do that? I got to get my mind set on what the Spirit desires. How do I do that? For you, I don't know. I can throw out suggestions. I can throw out examples. But you have to find out what helps you fix your eyes on the Spirit or fix your mind on the Spirit. What helps? For me, for a long time, I listened to Proverbs. For me, for a long time, or for a couple decades now, I listen to Scripture, audio, on a daily basis. I have it on my little stereo all through the night. And the Lord will periodically wake me up and say, did you hear that? And keep me meditating on stuff. I even have dreams to where my ears will pick up what's being said there, and then I'll have dreams, and I'll wake up having dreamed part of that text that I was listening to. It helps me keep my mind focused. Whatever it is. Now, conversely, if I go over and I pop in some secular music, which I tend to enjoy now and then, and I start listening to it and jamming out to it, I can only do it to a certain extent because it'll pull me out. It'll pull me out of that focus. It'll get my mind set over here. So I have to be very disciplined on how much I do that. You say, well, you shouldn't even be listening to that at all. Okay, go to that extreme, whatever. See if that helps you. It's not about the thing that you're doing, it's about your mindset. You know, I can listen to a secular song and pull out a spiritual truth out of it. I can recognize truth in there. I can understand the heart of the person singing the song. Well, you shouldn't be, whatever. Tell me when you're living successfully by following. You know, there's all these rules that people want to put on themselves. I don't do this anymore. I don't do that. I taught this message for the first time that I remember back in 1999. It's 2012. And I remember talking about in the message saying, you've got people that stand up there and go, well, I don't do this anymore. You're a Christian now? Yes. I don't smoke. I don't drink. I don't party like I used to. I don't swear. I don't do all those bad things that I used to do. And in that teaching, I said, so what do you do? Well, I go to church and tithe and, okay, but what do you do? What do you really do? Because what you're talking about to me when you say, I'm a Christian and I'm defined by what I don't do anymore, that's still the same focus. You might feel better about yourself from day to day, but most people don't. But you're still just doing the opposite of what you used to do. Your focus is still on that stuff. It's not focused on what the Spirit desires. Walking in freedom and purpose, speaking life over the people that come around you, that God leads into your life, about just spreading peace when you walk into a room. You walk into a room with people, I have so many people that come around and go, man, it's just so peaceful around your house. And the people in the house can stand up and tell you, there's turmoil that happens on a regular basis. We deal with this upheaval or that upheaval, not horrible things, but just things happen around here. It's not like perfect that, no, we never have any problems around here. That's why there's peace. No, peace is emanating from those who are operating in peace, and it spills over and flows out. Sometimes it flows out so much that other people are agitated by it, and they want to try to attack that peace. They go, I gotta fight with that. It happens. Point being, if It's not about what you don't do anymore. And that's the sin-focused mentality. Paul said, if I do what I don't want to do, it's no longer I who do it. It's sin living in me. He said, listen, if I find myself doing the stuff that I'm trying not to do, what's the problem? I can recognize it's something I don't want to do. You get that? I recognize it. I don't want to do this. Why did I just do that? Because I've allowed error to live in me. I've said, you know what? I'm just going to keep looking at error. I'm just going to keep looking at error. I'm just going to keep focused on error and try not to do the error. I'm just going to keep shooting at the target and never bother to adjust the sights and get mad. Well, this gun's just a piece of junk. Did you adjust the sights? What do you mean? Well, part of what you do when you get a new gun is you sight it in. That's one of the things you do. If you know how to shoot a gun, you sight it in. So you get it right. Well, I keep going out hunting and I can't get anything. Well, why is that? This gun just don't work right. Did you ever sight it in? No, it's just junk. I've heard people say that. You think I'm being silly or just throwing out a random example? I know of people that have sold guns because it was a junk gun. I know of people that bought guns off people and said this guy said it was a piece of junk. I bought it off him cheap, man. Took it out to the range, sighted it in. This gun's awesome. Wait. I caught a key phrase in there. You sighted it in. You mean you didn't allow error to exist in the gun? You removed the error. You removed the lack of sighting. It wasn't set right. So you took the time, and it was real small, and you sighted it in. So the next time you were confident, you went out and fired that gun, it was sighted in. Why don't we do that in our life? Because we're just like those people. We let error live in us, and we go, I don't want to do the error. But I've been staring at it all day long. And I say it, I don't want to be harsh with people, but somebody comes up and tells me they're really depressed. And then I look around their life and I go, you surround yourself with depressing stuff. What do you expect? I want to have compassion and help them overcome it. But I'm like, one of the common questions I ask people is, what are you surrounding yourself with? You can't do what the Spirit desires. You can't live by the Spirit and not gratify the desires of the sinful nature, which is error, and it's obvious, if you keep surrounding yourself with sinful nature stuff. Yeah, Pastor Ken.
Sinful nature stuff is easy to surround yourself with.
Absolutely.
That doesn't take any effort.
Right. And that's the whole key to this. Sin's not the problem. It's being disciplined enough to say, I'm going to focus on what gives me life and purpose. That takes effort. True relationships take effort. Walking in purpose takes effort. All this stuff takes effort. Here's the thing. If you don't want to live in purpose, you want to be miserable, then just accept it. Be a miserable person and go do your thing. But if you want to walk in purpose, you don't want, it's one thing to say, I don't want to live like this. It's another thing to say, I'm willing to focus on what will cause me not to live like that. And not just not live like that, but live real life. To be focused. Sin's not the problem. Sin's going to be there. Sin's paid for, but it's going to be there, waiting, crouching at the door. The desires within you, all that stuff's waiting to get you. I read it to you from Cain. You must master it. I read it to you in 1 John. You can't submit to it. It says in 1 John. How'd that say that? The one who is born of God does not continue to sin. The one who is born of God keeps him safe. That's what their phrase is, keeps him safe. But when you actually read the Greek, it says the one being born of God is keeping self. You're keeping yourself. What am I keeping myself? Am I trying not to sin? No. I'm going, Lord, help me focus on you. Help me see what you desire today. I've suggested different things. Reading Proverbs. Read a proverb a day at the beginning of your day. It'll filter through the rest of your day. That helped me a lot, but something else may help you. If you really like the Psalms, read through a Psalm. If you like scripture, whatever, it's music. Is it enough? I've talked with some people, and doing one thing's not enough. They need more. And so it basically got to turn up the volume on the spiritual things around you, whatever it is. You know, I watch John just grow and grow and grow. And you know one of the things that John does all the time, not for my benefit, he comes driving in here and I hear the radio and I hear my voice. And he comes driving out of here and I hear the radio and I hear my voice. And he comes in and he says, I listened to that one teaching 25 times. I'm still learning stuff out of it. And I watch the man just grow and grow and grow. What's he doing? Well, he's picked some messages that really speak to him and he just keeps listening to them over and over again. And it causes him to do what the Spirit desires. There's other people. You listen to John Bevere. You can listen to Jesse Duplantis. You listen to No, I was thinking of that's a good one. But I was thinking of Joseph Prince. Whoever, doesn't matter. Whatever works for you, get it done. Surround yourself with it. I can't listen to Alice in Chains talking about shooting up all day long and not eventually get a little depressed. You know what I'm saying? I got to go in. There's some days where I'm like, I just want to jam out to that music. And I go, why do I want to jam out to that music? You know? And then if I get into it and I start jamming out to that music, and after a while I go, you know what? There's times where I'm just listening, I'm jamming out to something, and I just stop and I go over and I just change it over. I can't feed on that stuff. Do you know if you eat at the garbage dump, eventually you're going to get sick. You know? Yeah.
It already takes effort to focus on the things of the Spirit, and then you got this thing over here distracting, and it makes it even more difficult.
Yeah. One of the things that I have, that those of you that are with me day in and day out, you know, very rare that you ever find me without something on in the background. Some kind of music or my headphones on listening to scripture. Very rare. Very rare that you ever find me like that. You know why? Because my mind will tend to wander too much if I don't have some kind of anchor, some type of focus going on somewhere. It's just, I know myself. Do you know yourself? Does your mind tend to wander a lot? Then find an anchor. Keep you in the right harbor. Because you'll get out into a place and you won't know. What is that? Is it the sin? No. But if I let sin exist and live in me, then I'll find myself doing what I don't want to do. I don't want to do those things. I don't want to have bitterness. I don't want to have resentment. I don't want to have anger. I don't want to have mistrust of people. I need to operate in love. Why? Because that reflects back to me, man. You know, I don't care if people ever love me back. Because I love myself and I'm loved by God. So I just keep pushing forward. But you know what? Just because I don't care whether people reciprocate love, you know what I find out? I get loved even more. When you're willing to let go something, you're willing to love people unconditionally, you find out you get a bunch of people around you who just love you. Like, wow. I was willing to do this, just go. All right, Lord, this is what you called me to. And he says, you know what? I'm going to send a bunch of people around you that are going to appreciate your heart. All right. You ever heard that? Birds of the feather flock together? There's some truth in that. You guys get something out of this? I'll keep going in some more of the messages and get into some more stuff. I got into it a little bit into Romans, but there is a wealth of information talking about how sin's been paid for. It's been taken care of. So what are we really struggling with? We're struggling with the desires that battle within us. How many times have I read that out of James chapter 4? What causes fights and quarrels? From the desires that battle within you? Okay, well, it's desire, it's desire, it's desire, it's desire. And where does the desire come from? The desire comes from where my mind is. What my mind is set on. If my mind is set on these wrong things, then I'll have a desire for that wrong thing. And then I'll do that wrong thing. And then I'll look at it and go, why did I do that thing? What do you mean, why'd you do that thing? Just as Paul said, you did it because you let sin live there. You let error, you just refuse to sight the gun in and just keep missing the target and then throw the gun away. That junk gun. You know, we use a phrase around here pretty common. maybe sometimes funny, but that's operator error. Well, this thing just won't work right. And I go, maybe it's the operator? I don't want to cast aspersions. I don't want to put you down or anything, but did you do such and such? Oh. No, you can say that gun's a piece of junk, but if you just refuse to sight it in, who do you have to blame? Whose responsibility is it? So we'll get into some more in part 2. Jace, did you have anything?
Well, when you mentioned consistency over continuity or continuity,
Yes.
it brought to mind that scripture that says Satan came to Jesus and he found nothing in him. And that phrase, he found nothing in him, speaks of consistency. It actually, the pictorial term that it gives is milk, where everything is consistent in the milk. There's no inconsistency there. There's no extra stuff. It's just pure.
Right.
And when he found nothing in Jesus, he wasn't able to do anything. And it speaks to us and says, don't give the devil a foothold. And then it brought me back also to, the way you know how you're leaking your passion in places is, what are you meditating on? Whatever you're meditating on, that's where you're expending your passion.
Absolutely. And that goes back to all those different scriptures I read where it says that Paul said, I don't want to do this, but evil's right there with me. So how do I not do it if evil's right there with me? I don't pay attention. I'm focused on something else.